this is a really special community. I like the music is really wonderful, and the dancing. I guess the dancers are gone, but they were really great. And the discussion this morning I thought was really wonderful and really interesting as well. So thanks for having me. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my story, what I've been doing in Grand Rapids and around the state, and hopefully encourage some of you to get more involved with some issues that you care about or that I care about or we care about. The reading from Howard Zinn is one of my favorites, so that's why I asked for that today. I reread that probably every 3 months or so, just to kind of recenter myself when I get overwhelmed or discouraged or need to be reminded that everything we do matters and that we have less time than we think sometimes. And so, thanks for reading that. Okay, so actually I need this a little bit higher. So I want to talk about 3 things. It was hard to narrow it down, but I kind of narrowed it down over the last week of 3 things that I want to talk about today. When I met with Kent, I asked him, why he wanted me to come out. I was not familiar with this community, but I did do some research after I met with him. And he said that he was interested in having me, and I think maybe David as well, because he liked the fact that I was willing to take personal risks to advance social justice in Grand Rapids and in Michigan. And that was not anything that I ever woke up one day and said, okay, I'm going to take a lot of risks and make my life a little bit challenging, more for people around me than myself sometimes. But as I got involved with the issues I cared about, it became necessary, and so I've just been doing that. So the 3 things I kind of want to talk about today are homelessness. That's been a huge issue for me over the last 25 years, and then I want to talk a little bit about drugs and drug policy, which is always an interesting topic for people. A lot of misunderstandings around those issues. And then I just want to talk about running for office, which was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. No regrets, but not easy. So homelessness, I grew up in Grand Rapids, went to Calvin College, and grew up in a very service-oriented church and family. And I was the one signing up for every single service project to everywhere, Mexico and Florida. And I also just love travel too, so I could kind of kill both of those birds with that one stone. So I was just out and about any service project that was available. I was the first one to sign up, basically. When I graduated Calvin, I studied literature there, and again, I just really liked reading books, so I was kind of amazed you could just read books and they'd give you a degree. But that's worked out well for me because I really look at literature as the study of people and how they behave in different places under different circumstances and why they do what they do. And so that's served me well in terms of politics and problem solving and working with people. So, having been in West Michigan most of my life, I thought, okay, I better go somewhere else for a little while, right? I don't want to. I loved it here, but I also felt that I really needed kind of a different perspective. So, I thought about Peace Corps, but I got the application, and it was like this big, and so I said, maybe there's something a little easier. So I looked into AmeriCorps, which was kind of the U.S. version of that, and went down to Louisiana. I had been to New Orleans and the Cajun area, and I thought, that's pretty close to going to a different country, different languages, different culture, so I'll just go down there. So I went down there, and when I was at Calvin, I had worked a lot with people coming out of state hospitals, state mental hospitals, and that were being integrated back into the community. So I did something similar down in Louisiana. And I was working in a drop-in center. The idea was we had folks coming out being released out of these hospitals, which was overall a really wonderful thing. However, people were just kind of terrified to go anywhere because they had not done that. And were really, really scared of the world outside. And so our goal was to at least have one safe place, one drop-in center where people could come. And I helped organize different folks, teaching different people. We had musicians, we had people that knitted, we had all different skills, and tried to kind of build up people's confidence with their skills to teach others, and then also just kind of have activities for people to do. So I noticed pretty early on, we'd have a couple of guys come through, and they'd come to the drop-in center, and they would just immediately fall asleep. And that wasn't really something that we could have everybody just falling asleep there. We didn't have enough room for it. We didn't have the capacity for it. And so I just started talking to them. I wasn't sure if they were over-medicated or what the issue was. And so I talked to them, and basically they had spent all night walking the streets because they were homeless. And the minute they were inside and safe, they would fall asleep. So the more I got involved with that, we worked to get them housing to the best we could. And the more I started thinking about it, I thought, without housing, what can you do? You can't do anything. All you do is think about where you're going to sleep and how to be safe. And so while I was kind of thinking about, I always knew I wanted to just work on human rights issues, but I didn't really know what my focus was going to be. So that's what I was trying to figure out. And so at that time I said, okay, housing, that's going to be my thing. I want to work on housing. I don't want anybody to live outside. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's right. So came back to Grand Rapids. I was telling my young cousin who wants to do some similar work to me, I said, I had my mom mail me the phone book, which is kind of funny to think about now. She mailed me the phone book, and I just looked up homelessness and sent my resume to every single organization that had homelessness in the name. So I got a job at HAP, Homeless Assistance Program at Salvation Army, which at the time was kind of the place everybody was sent to go to different shelters. And I was thrilled to be there, very excited, very young, early 20s. And within 2 weeks, I think, I just looked around and said, what is going on here? Probably about 70% of the people that came through the door were Black, African American, in a county that was about 10% Black. And, just kind of looked at my coworkers and what is going on here? I kind of grew up in a bubble in the suburbs and certainly was aware of racism, but wasn't necessarily aware of all of the different ways that manifested. And so then I started researching that and, did my job the best way I could, got folks as many jobs as I could, got folks as much housing, whatever else they were looking for, transportation, but quickly realized that homelessness was really not as much about the individuals that were homeless. It was much more about a system that wasn't working at all and really bad laws and really bad policies. And so then I kind of, and resources being used in really ineffective ways. So as much as I actually really, really loved working one-on-one with folks, I realized that really wasn't the way that I could use my time in the best possible way. So then I actually started researching a model called Housing First. And that model really spoke to me. It was kind of the opposite of the way we were doing, which was kind of a deficit model, which was a sort of idea that everybody creates their own situation and you need to get out of your own situation and maybe we'll keep you alive in the meantime, with some food and clothes and a shelter bed, but really it's up to you. You really need to solve this. And don't get me wrong, people make mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes. I don't know about y'all, but I don't really know that there's mistakes that are great enough where you get to live outside forever. So Housing First kind of turns that on its head. And the idea behind Housing First, it was actually founded by a gentleman who spoke with people that were homeless and asked them what they needed. And as shocking as it sounds, housing, that's what they were asking for. And so it's a phenomenal model. Fast forward 10 years, 10, 15 years after working in the system, and also leaving the system for a bit to open up a couple of businesses of my own. I did need to take a break from the work, and but was very eager to get back to it. And so about 6 years ago, after opening a couple businesses in Grand Rapids, I wanted to get back into the work. And so I took over an organization called Well House, which was failing. It was a fantastic organization that's been around since the 70s, but had kind of hit a bad spot. But they had a few houses, and they had a wonderful legacy. And I thought, all right, I had my own income now. This is a big deal, right? You know, you need to have control of your funds. This is something I've realized over the years. If you're going to take a lot of risks and you're going to do things that are not popular, it's really critical to have control of your own money, because that's the number one way folks will try to get in your way, is by taking your money or threatening to take your money for whatever program or project or your job or what have you. So that had happened to me quite a few times. So I needed to have control of my own money. I have a daughter. I have a partner. I needed to make sure we could pay our bills. And then took on Well House. And I said, all right, let's just see if this is going to work. Let's put folks in a house. Let's prioritize people that are least likely to get any other housing, people who may have a felony or a misdemeanor, people who've struggled with addiction, people with mental health issues. Let's do the opposite of what everybody else is doing and take the most likely to succeed. Let's take the least likely to succeed. I remember writing up this grant application. I said, we're going to house the so-called unhousable. And so we did. And I mean, I can't lie. I wasn't completely sure how this was going to go. But I knew I didn't want to be left wondering. And so I said, all right, let's see if this works. So we did. In 2013, we started. We had 3 houses. 5.5 years later, we had 14 houses, and we had moved over 200 people off the street. And over 90% had not returned to homelessness, which, if you're familiar with this work, thank you. Yeah, it was really hard. It was hard. And the hardest part was not working with the people that were homeless. The hardest part was the relentless attacks from other organizations and other groups. But we forged ahead. And I left that organization just in April because we had such a great team. We built an amazing board. We built an amazing staff. We had funds, and it was time for me to pass the baton to the next group. So they're still going. The next issue I've been intimately involved with, because of my working with people on the street, is drug policy reform. I chaired an organization called the Red Project. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. They operate in Kent County primarily. Now they're in Muskegon as well. That was another organization. I'm attracted to failing organizations for some reason. So that one was about to shut down. One of their greatest programs was called CleanWorks, and it was a syringe exchange. So if you're familiar with that, in Grand Rapids, probably about 15 years ago, they started that, where folks who were injection drug users could bring their syringes in and get clean ones. The thinking behind this was that at the time, 25% of people that injected drugs were HIV positive. And it was spreading rapidly to not only that community, but their families, their friends, their children. And so a lot of really brave people got Grand Rapids to approve this, which still blows my mind. And I had traveled a lot and worked in or spoken with people that work in a lot of different communities who their governments were not even remotely allowing something like this. And so I said, all right, well, we have approval to do this in Grand Rapids. We we need to keep this organization going. In 10 years, they had changed that data to 10% of people were HIV positive. Just a massive, massive drop just within that community, let alone all the different people that were no longer affected with HIV. Another thing we did there was, this was probably about 6 years ago. Our clients at Red Project started telling us, HIV, AIDS has been devastating. However, now the even greater danger to us is overdose. And looking back, we had no idea what would be happening now, right? This is just a horrible, horrible situation. Situation would be exponentially worse in Kent County if we had not gotten in front of this. So again, listening to the people affected by the issue, right? They're telling us, yes, we need to continue the exchange. However, we have to do something about watching our friends die, and people that we love die. And so that's when naloxone and Narcan were just starting to be distributed, which are the antidote. And so Red Project, because of the wisdom of the people we were serving, we got way in front of it. I mean, thousands of people have been trained. Hundreds are still alive because of the distribution of this anecdote. And now this is a national issue. Everybody's talking about this and distributing this drug, which is fantastic. And a lot of folks don't understand is that people that use drugs generally get better. They almost always get better. But you got to keep them alive. And you have to give them tools to keep themselves safe. So that's what we did. And one of the biggest risks for people that use drugs is the drugs, yes. However, the criminalization of the drugs. And so another thing that we started to look at, I saw this over and over and over again in my working with people on the street, is marijuana charges. And so people losing jobs, people losing their children, people losing housing or not able to access jobs or housing because of marijuana. And at the same time, half the people I know are having no issue whatsoever. However, people that are poor, people of color, were being very disproportionately affected by the criminalization of that particular drug. And with marijuana, the danger of the drug versus the danger of the criminalization of it was just astounding. So a group of us got together in Grand Rapids and worked to decriminalize and turned it into a civil infraction to have a certain amount of marijuana. We did this 6 years ago. Since that time, hundreds and hundreds of folks have gotten a ticket, mostly young people, mostly people of color, rather than an arrest, rather than a charge. They can still get financial aid. They can still get jobs. They can still get housing. We can't get the exact data. The Grand Rapids Police Department does not want to release that to us. Unfortunately, we're working with some city commissioners to try to get all of the exact data, but we've heard it is saving millions and millions of dollars for the city of Grand Rapids, but they don't want us to get that exact number. So that was another really big risk for us. I was telling the group this morning. I was worried. I was worried about my family. I was worried about my businesses. I was worried about the police following me around, which has happened. So I was worried about my customers. I own a local pub. I was worried about them being targeted. So we had to make sure that folks were getting home safe and et cetera. But it was absolutely worth it. It was absolutely worth it. And I've certainly got more than my share of hate mail over the years, but when I look at the impact these things have made, it has been exponentially worth it. So the last thing I want to talk about is running for office. So as I looked at these issues and I looked at how so many of the social problems that I was on the ground every day trying to solve were really a result of very, very bad policy and really, really poor use of resources. We're just constantly told, we don't have money for that. We don't have money for that, for education, for healthcare, for housing. We just don't have any money. Well, if you look at the general fund of Michigan, and we're spending about half of it on incarcerating people, is that the best use of our funds? The budget, one of the things I talked about a lot when I was running for city council in Grand Rapids was, the budget reflects our values. This document of how we're spending our money, how we're spending our resources, that is a statement of what our values are and what we believe in. And to have such an insane amount of money going into locking people up, again, mostly poor people, mostly people of color, that's on us, right? We're responsible for that. That's our money. So I said, all right, I got to run for office now. I got to try to change this, which I had no idea what I was getting into there. There's, as some of you may know, there's a pretty powerful Grand Rapids establishment that was pretty dedicated to keeping me out of that seat. And even though I had just an insane amount of support and incredible support, I lost that election. And many of my supporters were threatened, extorted, jobs threatened. It got really, really, really crazy. So I'm very proud of what I did, and it was absolutely worth it. And I would always rather have the knowledge of what's really going on, right? So that now I know, and now we can move forward with that information. So, and that, that speaks to people benefiting from the status quo, right? So there's a lot of things going on right now, and there's a lot of people benefiting from the things going on right now. Recently, I serve on the board of Am I Legalized, which is looking to legalize cannabis in Michigan. And recently, there was a giant press conference of prosecutors and law enforcement and public health officials, and which is kind of crazy. We paid for that too, by the way, right? That was our money, paying for the organizing of that and all those folks' time. And I mean, talk about a group that's benefiting from the status quo, right? There they are. And so that was really fascinating and really important to note, right? Because again, that's our money. We paid for that. So to close it out, we had a great conversation this morning. We talked about everything from water to unions to housing to race. And really, the two questions that I asked the group this morning were, what's the biggest risk that you've ever taken to improve other people's lives? And then the other question was, what's the impact that you've made on this planet while you've been here? Have you left it better than you found it? And so that was a really good conversation. And the last quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, the hero of mine. I hope you'll join me in following her wise words, which are, do what you feel in your heart to be right, for you'll be criticized anyway. Thank you very much.